Come on in to Margaret McSweeney's Kitchen for Kitchen Chat, where every week you'll meet chefs, cookbook authors, foodies, gourmets, and just plain people who love to eat. And along with laughter, chat, recipes, and stories about food, you'll sometimes also hear words of inspiration, love, and hope. As Margaret always says, Kitchen Chat is food for the senses and food for the soul. So grab a cup of coffee, put your feet up on a comfy chair, and get ready to spend a little time with Margaret and her friends.
Hello, dear foodie friends, and welcome to Kitchen Chat. This is your host, Margaret McSweeney, and I'm so glad you're joining me in my kitchen today. And during this time, we wanted to share with you comfort food and comfort mood, as the co-host, Chef Jamie Larita, likes to refer to it. So, Chef Jamie, thank you for being here.
Always, Margaret. It's always a pleasure to be on Kitchen Chat with you.
Oh, and you're in your kitchen, right?
I'm always in my kitchen. When am I not in my kitchen?
That is true.
If I'm not in my kitchen, Margaret, I'm in like another room thinking about how I need to get back in my kitchen.
That is true. The mind of a chef, for sure. Well, Chef Jamie and dear foodie friends, we are just in for a treat today. We have, as our special guest, Fanny Singer, who is the daughter of Alice Waters, and she has a new book out called Always Home, a daughter's stories and recipes. And welcome to Kitchen Chat, Fanny.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure.
Oh, well, such a highlight of my culinary journey through Kitchen Chat. And Jamie's heard the story a lot, but I don't think you've heard it, Fanny. The reason I do the show is a way to honor my late father, who was an incredible home chef, and he passed away 30 years ago. And my biggest regret in life was not being able to really cook in the kitchen with him. I never had or took the time to do that. And it's my way to understand what his joy in the kitchen and joy of food was all about. And I love that you are living your joy and sharing the joy with your wonderful mother, Alice Waters. And Jamie, I don't know if I ever shared with you the story. I actually was able to have a kitchen chat with Chef Alice Waters at Chez Panisse, and that was such a
Margaret,
highlight.
you told me the story. It was like the most jealous moment. I think one of the most jealous moments I ever had in my life. I remember it.
Well, maybe we can all have a kitchen chat together again in the near future with the four of us. So that will be fun. But meanwhile, what an honor and delight to have you on the show, Fanny. And I can't wait to hear about what really inspired you to write this book, Always Home.
You know, I think it really the sort of kernel of inspiration was working on the pantry book from 2015 with my mom. And that was, it was the first time I kind of exercised that kind of cookbook writing or recipe writing muscle and got really involved in the collaborative capacity with my mom. I did not ever imagine that I was going to be a cook. I still don't think of myself as really a cook, certainly not a professional cook. And I never really thought that I would get into the trade, the family trade, really, although cooking has always been a passion of mine. But then working on this book with my mom, which I co-wrote and illustrated, and then also spending the time, you know, both in the collaborative process. I was living in England still at the time, and I lived in England for 11 years from 2006. It was this way to communicating through food and about these recipes and about the illustrations was this way of feeling close to my mom. And I had, you know, very intentionally gone far away from Berkeley to study and to figure out kind of what I wanted to do with my life and what I was interested in. But I never lost that really the intensity and intimacy of our connection. And then it was sort of intensified even more by the process of working together on that book. So it's not that I was so much like waiting to write this book as I kind of walked backward into the opportunity of it, or the moment suddenly seemed right to reflect even more on what my experiences had been growing up in this environment. And then the recipes weren't so much about how I cook now, although many of them are things that I do really love and rely on regularly. So much of it was a look back almost archaeologically at what had been the foundations of my palate and how I came to taste and think about food and think about it, atmosphere and aesthetics and all of the things that surround the experience of eating in the way that I do.
Wow.
Or like a sneak peek into a quick story or a quick memory that you can share with our audience that might help us, like maybe as an amusé to the book?
I would say that the book kind of has different types of stories in it. They're all, well, first of all, we can acknowledge that Always Home is an absurdly prescient book title.
Yes.
But
yes.
Almost to the point where a few friends were like, did you do this on purpose? Did you know? But I've had a number of conversations with people who said that one of the things that has been so great about reading this book right now is the stories are very transporting, but also very short. And so you don't need to necessarily dedicate hours and hours and hours or days and days and days to feel like you're remaining immersed in the book. It kind of rewards even the short attention span of the moment. So that said, the stories are kind of different in style. Like some are things I remember in a crystalline capacity that have dialogue, that are a narration of usually some kind of absurd happening on the road with my parents when I was younger. A car sickness episode that nonetheless resulted in me moments after throwing up requesting the lobster salad at a restaurant in Paris, outside of Paris.
I love it.
Which I think is, that's kind of in a way that's the fodder that people expect, I think, of a child that comes from such culinary eminence. But on the other hand, the stories, I think, actually are for the most part really relatable because they're about how we all use our senses and how my mom, especially having a Montessori school training, she was intent on getting me to interact with the world in a very sensory way. And so you can, even if you haven't tasted some of these tastes or you haven't tried some of these dishes, I think you can conjure an image of what it might taste like if you're eating this green salad or you're smelling burning rosemary or, there's a very, I would like to think that reading it there's almost a tactility to it, like a kind of scratch and sniff kind of writing.
I love that. So I'm very curious, Fanny, what is your distinct childhood taste memory from, as you say, a mother whose eminence is known in the culinary? What is your favorite taste memory from childhood?
Well, there's one that is very, very pristine in my mind, and there's a story called First Fragola, which is an account of when I was very little. I was only 2.5, but I remember the first time I had sugar, and it was in a strawberry gelato in Italy. And the flavor of that was so extraordinary. I had a childhood basically devoid of sugar. My mom had completely positioned herself against its introduction to my early palate. And so when I first tried it, it was sort of hallucinatory.
Oh my God. I can't even imagine what it was like. I mean, I lived in Italy and I'm Italian by descent, but to not have sugar as a child, that had to be an explosion in your mouth.
I remember and I went to my mom and I was like, is there a photo of this? How do I remember this? I was like, it's a very faint, I kind of remember choosing the ice cream flavor. I really loved strawberries, so I selected strawberry. But that's all I remember of the entire vacation. I mean, there's nothing. And actually, I don't really have many other concrete memories for years afterwards, but this was so profound. And yet, I will say there was something about its exceptionalness that meant that I didn't think that it was going to be something that I experienced all the time. And and my palate is very savory. I'm not a sweet person at all. So it's almost kind of odd to invoke the gelato as the defining palate moment, but it's just one that I remember from very, very early on. My defining palate now tends towards garlic. That's how I would describe it.
All of the people that are so immersed in art I feel have a passion for food. And I've traveled with a lot of musicians, Sarah McLachlan and Madonna and Sting and the Chili Peppers, you name it, every genre of music, but they're all such big foodies.
I love that.
Yeah.
I mean, my mom has always said that she thinks the best chefs that she's known are really artists. And she means that not in that kind of, you know, sort of empty platitudinous way, but like actually they are artists in their lives, the way that they arrange everything around them and the way that they create things. It requires compulsion and the need to just get up and make something and think creatively and intuitively all the time in a way that kind of endlessly renews. I mean, I studied fine art when I was in college, and I alongside art history, and I had a very, you know, good draftsman, sort of quality of draftsmanship, and I like knew how to kind of do things technically, and I would, you know, have inspirations come to me, but I didn't have what I felt like was the driving, blinding compulsion to make art that is required of a truly great artist. And I was so interested in what qualities drive people. And I think probably also, without really thinking about it, was inspired by my mother, who is just completely, absolutely blindingly focused on what she is making with the Edible Schoolyard, with food justice, and with the unbendable code of ethics around the way that Japanese operates and serves food, and that there's something about her drive and compulsion that I was interested in studying on some level, and that's I think what led me in part into art history, to look at how other artists in another medium were also being driven by kind of unquenchable compulsion. And yet I know exactly who she's thinking about when she's talking about the artists, these artist cooks. And like two of them I wrote chapters about in the book. One of them is David Tanis, who's one of the great chefs who came up through Chez Panisse, but would kind of come, stay, leave, come back, has been involved in a number of other restaurants and has some of my favorite cookbooks around. And the other is Nilüfer Echavarria King, who never cooked at Chez Panisse or I think anywhere professionally. She was a culinary anthropologist, but she does helm the kitchen every Parsi New Year at Chez Panisse and cooks this incredible Indian meal in the downstairs restaurant. And those two people have that quality. And it's like you go into their homes and it's no surprise that everything's kind of beautiful and there's a bouquet of scented roses and, you know, just all of the components that make the entire environment feel considered and rich.
Everything matters.
I knew you were going to say that, Jamie. That is your logo in life. Everything matters. Yes. Truly. Right. I'm so curious, Fanny, in writing this book, was there anything that ended up surprising you throughout your journey of discovery? What surprised you most in writing this?
Actually, this is one of those really obnoxious things that writers say. They're like, it's just so easy. and I won't say it wasn't quite that easy. I write a lot of, I have written a PhD in art history, and I also write a fair amount of art criticism, and I do cultural reportage, and just recently was on the masthead at Wall Street Journal magazine. And that writing, there's something about writing in that vein that I feel like I need to be so accountable to the facts, to things that are outside of my own perception. Even if I'm writing a review, it's like, I want to make sure I've read every other review of that artist ever, or that I know I've really spent time with the literature. And there's this fastidiousness that also is sort of encumbering, because it feels like you have to get through so much before you can begin. Mm-hmm. And I think there was something about this writing, because I was only accountable to myself, really. It was my memories, and I didn't even feel like I needed to ask my mother permission for anything, because it wasn't a story that was in her voice. And of course I let her read the manuscript and veto anything. Not that the book was in any way expository, so I didn't really expect her to say, please take this out. But it turns intimate. It's very, very much an intimate portrayal of our relationship. to be able to sit down and just write from memory and write a very different type of narrative, and to write in this nonfiction capacity, in this not quite autobiography, but nonetheless in that vein, and to feel that, yes, frictionless experience of writing where there was not all these impediments was a joy. Like, I just loved writing this book, even though I was doing it alongside other work. And because of that, it took me, close to 2.5 or 3 years to really put together in its entirety. It just was a pleasure. And it was a pleasure to visit these people and these places again, because the book does take us around the world a bit, to meet other characters, especially in France.
Do you do any kind of podcast, or because you speak in violin? Like, when listening to you speak, it's actually that you're one of the people that I'm going to put on the list of people who speak in violin. Like, it's like listening.
Such a lovely thing to say.
Your voice,
you have just Jamie perfectly plugged my audio book.
Yes.
So for anyone who doesn't,
you're welcome, Fanny.
Yes, thank you. That was quite the endorsement. But I did read. I couldn't imagine having anyone else read the book, so I said, "Sure, I guess. I guess I'll read it." So
you would be crazy not to read your own.
But no, I know, especially with an autobiography too, or something, or memoir or something in that vein. I think it especially feels necessary if you're willing to just commit to doing it, because it's otherwise I think it would feel very foreign. But I managed to do that just right before the pandemic. I mean, I snuck in my last pickups, so that the book could actually launch on audio at the same time as it was scheduled to, on the same date as the book came out. I can't believe that I did that. Not even that long ago.
Margaret, what's your line right now? Say it.
Well, it was my father's line. He would always say, "God's trains run on time." So
that's good.
Yes. I love how you speak so lovingly about your mom, and I'm sure it puts it into the framework of, her as a parent versus, in addition to her as this incredible culinary royalty lineage here. But I'm curious, Fanny, if you could share with those moms who are out there listening, what did your mom do really well and really right, from your perspective, that you can share with them?
That's a great question.
Me included. So even with adult daughters.
I think that the most important thing, and this is just, it will sound cliche, but it's true, is just to be unconditionally loving to your kid. And people have asked me, especially if my parents did divorce when I was 13 or 14, friends of mine with kids who are getting divorced have asked me what they can do and how to navigate it. I'm like, just make sure your kid knows that you love them, no matter what. That's absolutely nothing could prevent them from loving you, from you loving them and them loving you, that bond is there. And of course, I didn't, I wasn't an angel as a teenager. It's plenty of very minor skirmishes in our house, but it just, I always felt an atmosphere in which I was being really embraced and cradled by my mother's just unflagging love. And she expressed that. I think sometimes the way to communicate that can become a little bit fraught when, kids are going through difficult stages or whatever. But one of the great ways of doing that is through food, because you easily communicate affection, I think, through that medium. And it's something that my mom did every single day. She always made me something delicious and nutritious, whether it was, for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And in high school, when I was, not, wanting to sort of pull back, I still was opening these lunch boxes every day at school, and she was making me something beautiful and writing me a little note. And, I just, so I think, ways of communicating that are outside of language are also really effective. And that can be in food, and it can also be actually in the way that even space is organized. I've been at my mom's house for the last few weeks because we've been quarantined with her. And every day. She hates that I have like my laptop on the kitchen table, and she will like put it away as soon as I step away from it. But if it's out and she knows I'm still working and she comes back from a walk, she'll place a little bouquet next to my computer every day. It renews a different bloom, just something tiny, something insignificant that she picked up, but that maybe had a beautiful color or a really intoxicating smell. And that to me is exactly that type of gesture. It's saying like, we're here together and I love you.
That is such a cute mom to do that.
I know. She's such a cute mom.
What a cute mom you have.
She's such a cutie. And she's so little, too, so she's extra cute.
I have so enjoyed, Fanny, watching the videos that you and your mother do together. There was one I was mesmerized by, particularly about this historic egg spoon video. Can you share with the listeners about this egg spoon?
Yes, the legendary egg spoon. This spoon was something that my mom read about in this book by William Rubel called The Magic of Fire. And she was so interested to learn about this 17th century French culinary tool that supposedly was designed to fry an egg in a spoon in the fireplace. And I'm so kind of imagining those huge hearths that you would have had in 17th century France, where there would be a fire day in, day out to heat the house. And usually those like homes, especially if there were, some sort of elite, people living in them, there would be stoves, like iron stoves as well, but those wouldn't usually be lit, I don't think, until later in the day because they took so much energy to fuel. So I guess there was like some kind of iron spoon that could just be shoved right into the open hearth, the hearth being kind of room sized almost in those old houses. And yet we hadn't, we'd seen ladles and antique ladles and whatnot, but nothing quite designed for this purpose. So my mom asked her friend, this Sicilian blacksmith named Angelo Garo, if he would consider making her one. And this was like in the early 90s, I think, like 92 or something. And Angelo made this spoon for her. And over the next, decade plus, couple decades really, it became this really iconic implement in her kitchen. And she would routinely make eggs for Leslie Stahl in 60 Minutes or any reporter coming through. And it's always held a fascination for anyone. And also because my mother has just a truly unusual gift in terms of in terms of fire cooking. I mean, she's really an incredible griller, and she's very, very comfortable in front of the fire in a way that I aspire to be and yet don't even remotely resemble, or can't even touch. But this spoon was something that when I started this little design company called Permanent Collection about 3 years ago with my friend Mariah Nielsen, and as we began to expand what we were making, because we were making some clothing objects and also homeware and some design collaborations, we were like, these would be nice to have a little kitchen collection. And the place to start seemed intuitively to be my mom's kitchen. What were her favorite pieces and what were the pieces that were most iconic? And then there was the spoon. It's like, what if we remade the spoon? And even went back to the original book and discovered that the drawing didn't really resemble what Angelo had made. And so we asked Sean Lovell, who's the wonderful blacksmith who makes the spoon, because Angelo actually doesn't forge anymore. He's gotten out of the smithing business. We asked Sean if she could make something that was a little closer to the illustration, that had a perfectly round rather than oval cup. And it has this domed bottom and a long handle that's exactly flush with the spoon, so that you don't you can really hold it straight out, and you don't it's not like a ladle. There's no angle there. And then you crack an egg in there and it just does something magic. There's the way that the domed bottom I think distributes the heat around the white, and the white just puffs up almost over the yolk. And you don't have to use a fire. We discovered that with the new spoons that we make for Permanent Collection, they're actually deep enough that they can be used on a gas stove. So that was a kind of new innovation too. But we had one egg left. one egg left in our quarantine pantry. And we had been asked by Cherry Bomb to make a video of cooking with this egg spoon for the Jubilee that they had last Sunday. And I was like, Mom, don't fuck it up. And I was like, you have one shot. And so the video, which was filmed by my boyfriend, who is here in quarantine with us, is up on both of our Instagram feeds and on our IGTV, and it's pretty hilarious. We're all, we've all been in quarantine now for weeks, so we're all kind of like a little loopy. And then just the success of this egg it energized us so much to see that it actually worked perfectly. I mean, we knew that the implement's a good implement, but still, it was really funny.
Oh, we'll make sure that we post that. I am curious. So what are you and your mom cooking during quarantine?
We've had some luck, being in California. We just have access to such good produce, and we are not really hurting for ingredients, I think, the way that many are.
Yeah.
And in part because Chez Panisse, when it closed, it needed to find a way to distribute the produce from Kennard Family Farms, which supplies Chez Panisse with most of its vegetables and fruits, and relies entirely on Chez Panisse to buy the product. So we needed to help Bob and his son Ross stay alive out there in Sonoma. So there are vegetable boxes that can be purchased, and it's not at all really keeping the restaurant afloat. It's more shoring up the livelihoods of the farms and farmers that have been supplying Chez Panisse for years. But it means that we get really gorgeous box of things delivered once a week. Wow. Of course, we still run through the salad instantaneously because I could eat just an inhuman amount every night. I've had to, if anything, that's where I feel like I've been hurting, is I'm only allowed one handful at least, which is hardly something to complain about in this context. So I'm wary, but yeah, we've been doing fine. I think, the conditions of this time certainly make you think about how you use ingredients, though. And we have a compost, heap that we have in our back garden, but I've been really rigorously insisting on keeping anything that's edible in a little bag in the freezer so that I can make a stock. So rather than jettisoning pumpkin seeds or radish tops or little bits of beet or things that normally my mom wouldn't put in a traditional chicken stock, we've been keeping to use in a vegetable stock or in a chicken stock or any kind of other stock. But I've been calling it zero waste veggie broth, but my mom calls it the compost broth. But they have slightly less delicious sounding connotations. But it's been a way to just eke out all the different all the nutrition really out of the ingredients that we do have, because there are things that are really scarce right now.
Wow.
Yeah, it's funny. I resonate with that as a chef myself, even finding, I'm baking a lot at home, a lot of sourdough and stuff like that, but I'm finding a use for every little crumb.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It just makes you feel like you want it.
I just think it's smart cooking, and I hope that people carry this, into the next phase, because it does stretch ingredients and it makes cooking more economical. And I mean, for instance, we're doing now, we're treating generally, we're not going much to the grocery store. So we're getting vegetable boxes, but we're not getting as many other types of ingredients or meat or anything. And so if we have a chicken, you take off the breasts, and we have paillard, and then which is actually a recipe in the book, and then we'll take off the legs and we'll braise those, and then finally the rest of the carcass goes into a stock pot, and we make chicken soup from that. And I think, and then you have a chicken soup, and then the last remaining stock goes into a risotto and so forth. And I think really providential cooking is something that we've just kind of lost touch with. And it's amazing how much that easily feeds three people, because we're also thinking of meat more as a condiment. And so there are more vegetables on the plate, and it stretches things for longer. And I would say that generally was the way that we cooked, but not to this extent. I do feel like this time has shined more light on that way of treating ingredients, and also just gratitude and reverence
yes.
for nature, for farmers, so and true. For local supply chains.
Oh, wow.
I'm just sitting here and I'm just like shaking my head back and forth thinking, why the hell am I not quarantined with them?
That would be a great quarantine, I tell you. That is.
We're really bad bakers, okay? If it must be known, that's not where we excel. And I gather that
I can bake. I'm funny. Okay. I can rearrange your furniture. There's so many things I can do for you.
You are amazing. Well, I cannot wait one of these days, Jamie, for both of us to go to Chez Panisse and just sit at a table with Fanny.
I've been all around the world. You know that, Margaret.
Yes.
I cannot believe I've never been there in my life. I can't believe it.
It's so special. And do you have a special memory about Chez Panisse throughout the years?
You're going to have to buy Always Home, man.
Yes.
Yeah, no.
Tons of memories in there.
Well, we will,
hey,
yes.
Don't you worry about that.
There is one chapter that's dedicated specifically to the restaurant. And just to talk, the reason my mom wrote those children's books, Fanny at Chez Panisse and then more recently Fanny at France, was because she sort of saw the way that I was living there, living at the restaurant really almost, because it was in parallel to the life that we had at home. And I think I just imagined that both spaces were more or less my home, wow. As a kid. There wasn't much of a difference. And I think she saw that as a kind of, Eloise story, which is why she thought it might lend itself to making a children's book. But, there's a more fantastical tone to the way that the stories are told in Fanny at Chez Panisse. But it really was kind of like that, feeling totally free to ramble through that restaurant and kind of knowing exactly how to get from point A to point B fastest, or like who would be likeliest to give me a sweet treat if I went into the pastry department. Or my favorite thing to do was to go up to the bartender, and it was mostly successful at lunchtime when there were just slightly more junior bartenders, but I would convince them to give me a pint glass of just milk foam from the cappuccino machine.
I was like, where was it going?
I just loved foam. I just milk foam, like the type that's on the top of the cappuccino, but I hated the taste of coffee. So I really only wanted like a glass of foam, but it took, I think, like an entire quart or even maybe half gallon or something of milk to make that much foam. So it was a complete, most uneconomical beverage I could have ordered. But if I was not being overly scrutinized by my mother, then I could get away with it.
Oh, that is just beautiful. Always Home with a Taste of Foam, I guess, could be the subtitle.
I wouldn't mind a cappuccino machine in our house right now. Let me tell you.
Well, I have one. I'm just letting you know. I may not have an egg spoon or Alice Waters in my house, but I have a cappuccino machine.
I'm jealous of that.
Oh, well, this will be a fun future gathering for sure. But meanwhile, I always like to end Kitchen Chat with your top 3 tips for the home chef.
Well, I really think getting a good mortar and pestle or Japanese suribachii or some sort is just indispensable. I think nailing a good salad vinaigrette is one of the great tools you can have as a cook, because a good salad vinaigrette can go on everything, go on salad, but can also get drizzled over vegetables or whatever, really. And so I feel like it might be one of the things that my friends who are introduced to my cooking kind of what most resonates with them right away. It's like, they're like, what is this salad dressing? And it's just a very simple kind of Chez Panisse style pounded garlic dressing. But you need a good, you can't do it with a garlic press. It bruises the garlic in a certain way, and you can't really do it by just mincing it. And I do, like, if I don't have a mortar and pestle if I'm traveling, I will use the blade of a knife to smash it as much as possible. But nothing like having a proper mortar. And the reason I care about it so much that we made a sort of Japanese style suribachii as part of permanent collection, because they're like, people need to have this tool. And I think it's nice to have one that's hand thrown, because mostly they're kind of industrial ram press ceramic pieces, but it's such a useful tool. It's nice to have a beautiful one. So I care about that almost more than anything. And then I guess the other thing that I think of right now, and I think it's because my mom has this one nice this one Japanese knife that's just very sharp, and I've just been loving cooking with it because it's so just easy to chop things and chop garlic, which I'm doing constantly. I think maybe my other tip is just use more garlic, but then also have a good knife to cut it with.
We're best friends. I don't know if you know this, Fanny, but we're best friends.
Yes, you all.
I resonate with all that.
Soulmate.
Well, thank you so much for being on Kitchen Chat today. This has just been wonderful. And Jamie,
so
as always, thank you. And foodie friends, will make sure we post a link to Always Home, A Daughter's Recipes and Stories by Fanny Singer. Also, we'll have a link to her website, fannysinger.com, and also to her permanent collection. I love the items that she has featured there. Just beautiful. Make sure you check out her. Thank you so much. Oh, make sure you check out her virtual events as well. Those are coming up, and hopefully in-person book tours soon. But thank you to both of you. And thank you. Oh, and thank you, dear foodie friends, for joining me on Kitchen Chat. Please visit me in my kitchen, kitchenchat.info. And always remember to take a moment and savor the day.
Thanks for joining Margaret for Kitchen Chat today. Margaret would be so excited for you to drop by and visit with her at kitchenchat.info, where you'll enjoy podcasts, blogs, recipes, tips from chefs, and even great giveaways. She invites you to share your recipes and kitchen stories too. As Margaret always says, savor the day.